Welcome, everyone. My name is Allison Portnell-Lathrop, and I'm the head of public programs at the Ackland Art Museum. And we're so excited to be entering our third day of the Intergalactic Soulstice, our 3-day Afrofuturist Arts Festival here on Ackland.org. And today's special event of the morning, actually, we'll have some more this afternoon, is our comic book drawing workshop with the members of Intergalactic Soul, Jason Woodberry and Marcus Kiser. So their work has been on view at the museum since last summer, and we're really excited to have been able to welcome the artists to the museum in person last fall and to celebrate the installation and get to talk about it and draw about it and write about it and think about it all year. But it's really thrilling to have both of the artists here live, and not in person, but live for this workshop today, all the way from Charlotte. So with that, I'll let Jason and Marcus kick things off.
All right, so for those who don't know, I'm Jason Woodberry.
I'm Marcus Kiser.
So long story short, I'll be the guy probably running my mouth half the time, and Marcus is the one that actually going to be giving you resourceful information. But first of all, so happy Father's Day, happy Intergalactic Soulstice. So just a quick background, me and Marcus, as she's mentioned, we currently have an installation at the Ackland. My background is in software development. Marcus's background, or he can tell you himself, but basically on top of that, we both have a long lines experience in marketing. And one of the things that that we came to a head about regarding Intergalactic Soul was we wanted to use our talents to push a message, and we understood how like these marketing companies, you know, they take this message, they brand it, and then they create a product around it in order to give people something to rally on there. I guess that's the way you think. So when you think obey your thirst, you're like, Sprite. So, we took that and we created a message of social justice and equality. And yeah, and then took our fandom of comic books, retrofuturism, like Johnny Quest cartoons, like a lot of cartoons from the 80s and whatnot. And we applied that to a contemporary fine art space. So, Marcus?
Yeah, so I'm Marcus Kiser, multimedia designer. I don't know, I do a lot. I'm looking at the question, so I want to answer this question really quick. From Norma.
I can't see the questions.
It's in the chat. From Norma, how did you get interested in intergalactic topics, and at what age? I think I've been doing this. I've been like ever since I was a kid. I was always interested in like space and astronomy. I was a huge Star Wars fan, huge science fiction fan. It being Father's Day, one of the things like me and my dad would do was like, in the summertime when school was out, he would buy me like a new telescope every year, and we would go look at the moon sometimes in the summertime. So I was always kind of interested in that facet of stuff. And then, at one point I was talking about becoming an astronomer, but I kind of got caught up in like designing and drawing, and then I was super interested in comic books. So I would say probably around the age of like 8 or 9, I've kind of just been this space nerd, I guess. And then, just always really into comic books. What about you, Jason?
So I have an older brother. He's 5 years older than me. And so I caught on to that stuff like early on. Everything I was introduced to came from him. So, he already had like an Atari before I was like, when I was like learning how to walk and such. But I got introduced to comic books and anime sort of around the same time. So my uncle, I don't know from where or how, but he had these VHSs that had a bunch of old Astro Boy cartoons on it, like the black and white ones. And then my brother was really huge into like Robotech. And of course there was like this just gamut of 80s cartoons. So like, yeah, I was just always into like animation, to cartoons. I rarely wanted to watch anything that was like actually real people acting. Everything was just like about cartoons and this, like these different fantasy worlds, and just seeing how people just stretch their imagination and create these like universes. And that's kind of where, yeah, that's kind of where everything stemmed from. From there, it was just like, when I got my hands on my first comic book, it was the first issue of X-Men, which I thought I had something special, but come to find out they printed like a zillion of them. But once I got that, that was it. It was over.
And also like, and I haven't heard of the book, Do Androids Dream of
I just
Electric
wrote that
Sheep?
down. I just wrote that down.
But yeah, so I guess if we want to get, are we ready to get started with the actual drawing workshop? I've found a way to simplify this to where anybody can follow. You know, I'll be using Adobe Illustrator today on this when sharing my screen. I guess if you guys have pen and paper at home, you can follow with that as well. Or if you're in Illustrator, you can follow me. But if you're using any other tablet program, just feel free to chime in. I can try to help you out, but I'm super familiar with Illustrator. So is everyone ready to get started? I'm assuming that's a yes. Okay, yeah, I see the chats. Okay, so let me just do a quick screen share. Give me 1 second. Okay, so everyone sees my screen, correct?
Yep, I see it.
So I'm in Adobe Illustrator, and what I've done here, I've made these really cool Ackland art boards, you know, the logo here. So the thing about comic books is understanding anatomy, and it's just anatomy and shapes, and how we proportion the body. So as you can see here, if everyone could just kind of start off by drawing like an oval in the center, just follow my mouse. And then we have this cross going down the middle of the oval. And as you guys know, this is going to represent the head of our character. And this little line in the middle here, I can zoom in. Small line in the middle would actually be the nose. So this is the nose. This is where the eyes are going to be. This is where the mouth is going to be. And then these over here are going to be our hands. So simplify, like one circle, one oval. Then you have like these slanted rectangles with this smaller rectangle at the edge. So if everyone could like draw out that simple thing and draw it lightly, because this is just going to be our skeleton for the character. And the reason, like, one thing about what really got me interested in like science fiction and comic books was a lot of these stories we could relate to like real life. You know, like we always want to be the hero. So like this is also like the way we create our hero is kind of going to be an expression of like who we are and like how we see ourselves. And I hope everyone has a positive expression off of that part. So if everyone's got their oval drawn with their cross, we're just going to come in here. Let me close some of these boards on my screen. I don't need this, won't need this. And brushes. So we're going to come in here and start with the eyes. So if everyone can see, I'm going to just come in with make sure my right brush is picked. Just pretend that, you know, like that I'm using like a pen and paper like you guys are. So I'm just gonna come in here, I'm gonna draw some eyebrows. I'm gonna give this person a nice little serious face expression. Put some, some light eyebrows in here. And then we're gonna come in and draw his eyeballs. And this could be whatever you want it to be. Could be a non-binary character, it could be a guy, it could be a girl, it could be an alien. You can put the eyes wherever you want to put them. It's up to you guys and how you express yourselves. So we can see how the eyes are starting to develop. I want to use a thinner line. So then I'm going to come in and draw a little nose here. Make your nose as pointy or wide as you want it. But you can kind of see how I'm following this simple skeleton that I created. It's just a simple cross. And if you want your character to look up, you probably would start your line here, would probably be more like up here. And then, you could have your eyes here. And, he could be, and then the nose would probably be here. But it's just understanding like how the head works and how the head turns and like how your body moves. Okay. So now I'm going to come in down here. This is where our mouth line is. I'm going to put a bottom lip here. Going to give him a nice little lip. And this is just really simple and basic. And one thing I like to do is so once we start off with the simple stuff, we kind of start to add our own style and our techniques. I don't know if you guys have seen any of the Intergalactic Soul illustration work, but me and Jason were kind of experimenting and things with Illustrator and things like that. So that's how we kind of came up with that whole style, just playing with Illustrator brushes. Everything's vector, so it could be printed and reimagined to any type of medium, any type of size without distortion. So everybody can see how we kind of came into our character. It kind of looks like an egghead person. So I'm going to come out here. We see this is the outline of the head. Come out here, throw some ears in here. Some basic ears. I'm going to come in and add give my guy some cheekbones. And now we can kind of just come in and fill this head in. Now, if you want your character to be a little rounder, you can make your circle, your oval a little more rounded. If you want to, I have a big round head, so if I was drawing a self-portrait, I probably would make it a little more circular. Or you could come in, you could make them thinner. It's up to you guys. It's gonna come in here. Actually, that's a little rough. So let me give him a broad chin. So now this is where you guys get to be creative as well. So however you want your character's hair, characters can have facial hair. So, if you were to do a beard, you would come down here. This is rough. Do something like this. If you don't want a beard, if you're creating a female character, you want to add some lashes. Or even if you, even if you want to show teeth, come in here and do something like this. Or if you want to give him a smile, he looks kind of evil right there. Nice little evil smile. But it's just all about how we manipulate the lines and how we manipulate the shapes. So hair, I'm bald myself, so I always make my characters bald. So we're just gonna come in and fill out fill out their head. But if you wanted to give your person some hair, you know, depending on what kind of hairstyle, you just come in here. You know, like if we gave them a box haircut, give them a nice edge up. You could just do your fills. There's so many ways you could do this. You wanna, if you don't even want your character to be known, you could add a mask by just doing something like this. But if we added a mask, we would have to take away this stuff as well. So is everyone following along so far? Am I moving too fast? So everybody can see like how we kind of came in and just developed our quick head sketch, rough head sketch. These are just basic brushes in Illustrator. And so you're pretty much just kind of coming in here and creating this character. This guy looks a little evil, so your character doesn't have to look as sinister as my guy. Or if you didn't even want to put a face at all, you know, you can maybe just add some kind of symbol over his face with just the outlines. You know, like if you had like a star symbol. This is the star of inclusiveness. We're going to talk about inclusive design and how we can apply these equitable laws to like our characters and things. So now we're going to come in. So we got our head drawn. And it's up to you guys, like use your imagination to however you want your character to look. Hopefully at the end we can share our characters. So now I'm gonna come in and we're gonna start on the fist. So this is just a basic pose. We're gonna have him actually, or him or her, flying at you, him, her, or they. So I'm gonna come in and start on the fist. And so I'm looking at my rectangle that I drew, and I'm just going to use this as a guide to kind of draw the fingers in here. And as you guys can see how this is starting to develop. Thumb here, this box here would be the thumb. Knuckles, really rough knuckles. And these are where the fingers are folded under. So this would be the thumb, that would be the nail. So does everyone see how we use that rectangle to kind of guide and create like the fingers? So now this is the hand, this is hand number one. And now we're gonna come over here to hand number two and pretty much do the same thing. We're gonna just use our rectangle as our guide, and then we're gonna come down here and drop these fingers in here. Same thing, come down, this is the thumb. And then just complete these lines for the fingers. Put the thumbnail there. And I always tend to rush, so I'm sorry if this looks a little sloppy. So now we see how like we've developed this into this person kind of flying at you. So now what we're gonna come in and do, so you've noticed before, we've had our basic oval and our two rectangles. We're gonna come in and fill in the arms and the chest area. So what I like to do is, so we're talking about shoulders. So I like to put some little circles here because the shoulders will be somewhere in here. And then I'm just gonna come up at the top of the ear and just come off and draw that basic line. And then I'm gonna draw another line here and here. So this will be the shoulder. And then we're foreshortening this, so you can't see the whole arm, but this is pretty much the forearm here. I'm just gonna erase those circles. And then we're gonna come back over here and do the same thing. Come in here, shoulder. This is a little bit of the bicep. And then the forearm kind of comes in here like this. This is actually part of the back too. Quick little anatomy. And so this is also, I was gonna say a quick little anatomy lesson, but also learning about foreshortening. So, you know, like your arm is actually longer than this, but you know, this gives you the illusion that the character is coming at you. So you can't actually see the bicep in here, but shoulder, forearm, fist. Same over here. And then we're gonna come here just below the chin. And this is where we're gonna fill in the chest area. Now, depending on whether you have a guy or a girl, you know, you can add, you just wanna come in and kind of put this line here. So I think the collarbone would be somewhere in here. And this would be the chest area. If you had a female character, you probably would, well, I was gonna say you wanna give her breast, but that's a bad breast. You could kind of make these a little larger depending on how you want your character. So that's like a really quick and simple way of just kind of drawing like this basic flying pose for the character. For those of you who wanted to add hair, you know, we could probably have the hair kind of coming off of the head, flying back, because there will be like wind and however way you want to make your hair. That's, you know, if there's long hair. And if you wanted to give them a nice natural fro. And Jason, if you could take a look at if you can still see the chat, like let me know if there are any questions in the chat, because I can't see any of the chat. But like this lesson, again, like I wanted to say, like this is about how we express ourselves. And
Can you draw locks? You had a question, can you draw locks?
Locks. Yeah, so we had locks. These locks are kind of, these are almost like cornrows, but I would kind of want the locks to kind of be flying back. Kind of like the same way we had that hair earlier.
Because one thing you could do too when you're doing locks is it's like one of the tricky things about drawing like drawing hair is that you don't want to show every strand when you draw hair, because otherwise it's just going to look like a mess. So generally you would kind of draw the general shape of what the hair is. So like for locks, you know, you would put like a couple lines in there just to show that it is hair and that it's separated in comparison to drawing like each single lock one by one.
Yeah. So with the locks, you kind of want to make them a bit more square at the end as well. Even if he was like to have the locks in a ponytail, kind of have like, because you would kind of give it that look. But also I got to think about physics too, because if this person is coming out that way, then the hair would kind of be going back that way. So yeah, I like to, you know, when I'm doing locks, I kind of just always like to kind of put that square pattern at the end of it like that.
That's dope.
But yeah, like one thing I wanted to talk to y'all about, the thing about like with these workshops is like, you know, me and Jason have done a couple of these, and you know, it's more so about like, you know, I know we live in like this world and we're always like talking about our differences and like we can celebrate like our differences. And I really wanted to do this, you know, a big reason I really got into creating Intergalactic Soul, like this show was started behind the Ferguson protests after Mike Brown, but I kind of wanted, you know, representation means a lot to me as well. So, you know, I'm sure Jason agrees, like when we kind of started doing, like, there wasn't like a lot of science fiction that represented people that looked like me, you know, outside of like, there might be one or two Black people in Star Wars, but, you know, like, you know, I wanted to see more, and I see a lot more inclusive, like, I see a lot more of that stuff today, because the latest Star Wars, they're like all types of characters, you know, like, we're talking about, you know, when I was growing up, most of the characters were just like white superheroes, Superman, Batman, and you might have, you know, like Black Panther, who just recently became popular. You might have those guys sprinkled in somewhere, but I kind of wanted to create this universe of just like different people, you know, like finding like our unique voices to the world. So I found that like when we're expressing ourselves and like how we see ourselves as heroes, or sure there's some people that want to be villains too, but like I'm focusing on the heroes right now. But like how do we express ourselves? How do, you know, what's our own superpower? Because this stuff doesn't have to always be fictional. Like how do we get out in the world and serve every day and like help to build like better worlds? And then that stuff is like so much easier when you can relate it to like to comics.
Yeah,
So,
real quick. We have a question. Norma asked, could you explain the proportions of the head?
The proportions of the head, like meaning. What do you mean by just the proportions? Like, why did I make the head so big, or what?
Just the line, classic proportions with just lines.
Oh, yeah, pretty much. I mean, I guess like I guess I just kind of came in here and drew the eyes in and just kind of wanted the head kind of leaning forward to you, or looking upward, coming towards you. So with just the lines, I just kind of came in here with the cross, came in down here. We can adjust these lines to make it, to give it like a different look, but probably since his head is already looking forward, the best way would probably be to like bring these lines down to give them more of a like, you know, if we wanted him to look faster, we
She
could
said,
just
oh, my bad. Hold on, go ahead.
make him look up.
No, the question was, how would these proportions work with a round shaped head? Rather more like.
Oh, well, let's try that. So I'm gonna redo this head really quick. So say like if the head was a little rounder. Right, so let me get rid of this stuff. Is this round enough? So this is a really round head.
Mysterio.
Come in here and delete that chin. Okay, it's the same exact principle. Let's just pretend like this head is a little rounder. Come in here, draw my cross. So we see how we got that. I'm gonna lighten these lines really quick so that we can see. So it's the same idea as we had with the other head. I'm gonna zoom in here. This one's a little further down. Go up here, lighten that. I'm not used to drawing on the spot either, so bear with me. So we kind of make the eyebrows a little wider. Come back in here, still draw the eyes. I'm gonna drop my nose in here. Bottom lip. Let's give him this evil smile. Eyebrows. The ears could kind of be out here. If you even want ears at all. You know, so like, but it's still like understanding like the proportions of like the skull. So like, you know, you kind of have to, if you imagine this being the skull, you know, these would be your cheekbones, you know, like eye sockets here. So it's still, you know, it's kind of like just imagining like, it's kind of creepy, but if you like look at somebody's face and imagine what their skull looks like.
All right.
So it's like the, so did that answer the question? So, and even like, even if it's not a face, like if it was like Mysterio, I'm not even sure if everybody is familiar with who Mysterio is. You know, like who has like the kind of like the fish bowl helmet or mask. You know.
So real quick, so there's three questions. So Norma, regarding the round shaped head, had mentioned a classic oval head. Are the eyes placed 3/4 down, nose further down, ears always between the eyes? Like a question. It's a question for him.
Yeah. Always use the 3/4 rule. 3/4 down, and it also depends on how you want the head tilted as well. Because I can also show you something where if we went further than 3/4, let me try to erase this. So even if we, like, there's also a way you could, so we still have the head here. If you want it, like, for me, if you want it like a more sinister aerodynamic look, you can even like, this would be crazy to start the eyes down here. So if we were to start the eyes this low, and I'm off of my cross, as you can see, but the nose would be here, lip would kind of be here. This would be more the top of the head that you could see there. So depending on like where you place the eyes can also, because if we did it like this way, then, you know, this would be, you'd be looking at more of the top of the head versus like what we had before. I hope I'm answering these questions correctly. I mean, I hope they're helpful.
You were also asked, the next question was, can you draw earrings? Like,
what type of earrings? We want some like bamboo earrings or some hoops or?
We'll go with the hoop earrings, the bamboos, the bigger ones. Big black woman earrings.
It's Juneteenth, so we're about to represent. So earrings would be simple. So let's pretend that these are the ears, and we wanted to throw some hoops in here. You know, I'm gonna take out this collarbone real quick. So it's simple. You just kind of come down here depending on, you know, how you want the earrings, how they, you know, how they would hang. So you can either do it like this, or you can kind of have them out to the side, you know, or even if they weren't the hoops, you know, you put some studs in there like that. You know, if we wanted to have a necklace, yeah, think about your physics again. So your necklace would probably be coming off. You know, we're gonna give them a medallion, and it probably would be kind of flying off like that. You know, pretending like this is the face again. We're gonna kind of draw that skull thing in there. So yeah, like the necklace, you gotta think about it. It probably would be kind of flying back along with the hair as well. But then like, so yeah, like this is pretty much basic outline. So now we want to think about lighting and shading. So we're just gonna pretend that the sun is here. Just gonna put the sun right above it. So you know if your light is coming down this way, then your shadows are gonna be coming, your shadows are gonna kind of be coming from this way. So it's kind of, you know, normally like when I'm drawing, like when I want to put shadows and I kind of just come in and X stuff out that I want to be dark or black, so I'll know how to fill that in.
Real quick, so you have a question. Before you start drawing, how do you loosen up before working on a project?
Man, I'm gonna be completely honest. I had a couple of illustration jobs due this week, and me and Jason worked on that Black Lives Matter mural that was in downtown Charlotte. So coming up with concepts, this is how I do it. And this has been really helpful for my, you know, health-wise as well. Like I normally, I think about the concept, and then I've been going on like walks before anything. So I've been doing like these 3-mile walks, trying to do like, I normally do about 15 to 20 miles a week just in walking. I'll just get my music and I'll just go on like a nice little 3-mile walk to clear my mind, come up with the concept. And for me, like a lot of my work is not only just the illustration work, but I also have to be the designer. So that means I have to come up with the mastheads, the titles, the logos, the placement, how the composition is gonna look. I need to come up with all of that stuff. So it's just more than just being able just to do the illustration. And yeah, I've just been kind of like going on these walks, eating more kale and just clearing my mind. And that like helps a whole lot with me because, you know, just, and like, you know, nice little nature walks, you know, walking with the squirrels, letting the forest accept me. So like that
The
helps a
co
lot.
the cosign with that too, like I guess like when it comes to coming up with an idea or coming up with a concept, it's rarely ever do I come up with a concept when I'm actually sitting in front of the machine or like I'm sitting there with like a note, like a sketchbook or anything in hand. Usually it'll be I'm just doing something totally, like I totally disconnect away from it. And the idea eventually come, maybe I'm just listening to a song or like Marcus said, like I'm working out or something along the lines of that. But like if, as far as like loosen up, I guess to say like kind of like a warm up drill, whatever. I don't have anything in particular. I can't say that it works for everybody. I don't even know if this is a form of warm up thing. But one thing I do find myself doing, even if I'm an illustrator, is that I'll just start drawing like squiggly line. I'll just start drawing like I'll draw like a square, but I'm like shading. So I'm just going from like darker to light, then going like light to dark, just doing different lines, like different shapes, circles, oblong, circle, ovals, trapezoids. And I'll keep doing that and just doing it and doing it. And then eventually like I'll start to get into the actual drawing the actual piece. And I don't, hopefully, and hoping that like at that point, like, I'm warmed up and I can
Yeah.
actually execute what it is I'm trying to make. But it never hurts to have a reference either. There's no shame in getting a reference.
Yeah, use references. And also like as far as like just like I would sort of count what we're doing now as a warm up because these lines are really it's almost like a gesture drawing where there's like a lot of movement in the lines and things like that. And then I normally once we get this going, then I'll probably come back over this and kind of clean everything up with the inking process and that stuff. But yeah, I was gonna that was a good question. I was gonna come back in here, so like if we kind of added the shadows in here, um, and then we could kind of throw some dark shadows on the forearm. This would be the shoulder, the fingers, so it'll be a little darker here, be a little darker at the bottom of those digits. Is anybody doing anything? Is anybody using digital tablets or is everyone uh, just using pen and paper?
Pencil and paper.
Okay.
But now.
So I'm a little, so like I
we
found
got
out.
Procreate. Someone got Procreate here.
Okay, so for me, digital is a lot quicker and a lot faster. Like I normally could do this a lot, like, like I know all my shortcuts. Like if I want to come in and draw a circle, if I want to get rid of it, it's just that quick. If I need to like copy and paste, get copy and paste and play. Like if I wanted to, I had like two palettes over here, but like I've learned like all of my shortcuts in Illustrator. So like if I'm like, okay, like let's copy and paste in place, if I need to do, if I wanted to make this one another person or whatnot. So normally that's another thing when I'm loosening it up, I normally just have like my sketchbook, just the traditional paper and Sharpie. I use a lot of Sharpies, but it's also like I want to say like in doing digital, also know your traditional techniques as well. That'll help out a whole lot when doing digital stuff. I know a lot of people are like hate on digital, and I know people are afraid of digital, but
so one question I was asked earlier, I totally got mentioned. It was about like comic panels or like storyboarding. I don't know if we got time to do like a very, very like skeletal look from one panel to the next, like a 3-panel But if you wanted to
Yeah.
explain that, because
Yeah.
you can
So,
learn a lot from watching movies on how to do
sequential
that.
storytelling. Yeah. When I was in college, I had to take a introduction to film class, and it was really just a writing intensive class where all we would do was like review like old films. And I was kind of hating because I signed up because I thought we would be watching Jurassic Park and movies like that, but we weren't. We were watching a bunch of classic stuff like Singing in the Rain and North by Northwest. But anyway, that class helped me a lot as far as sequential art and sequential storytelling, understanding camera angles, understanding pacing. And I think this is a whole subject within itself. And one book that I could suggest everybody if you want to learn more about sequential storytelling is a book called Understanding Comics. And I have to find I forgot the guy that wrote it. But in telling stories, like how can you tell a story? Like think of it as when you're drawing comics, think of like how would you like watching a movie, think about your camera angles, your high angles, your bird's eye view angles. And then it's about pacing. So it's not just about just putting the squares on the page, but also these squares should also represent like the story. So like, you can combine panels, like they don't all have to be the same size. So you can have like two images in here, and you could have, like this main image is a splash page, and then you could have, inserts of like different angles within here. I think one of my two of my favorite comic artists are I love the way that I used to read a lot of Todd Mcfarlane stuff. Todd Mcfarlane, he drew a book called Spawn. That was my favorite book as a teenager, about this war of heaven and hell. And then he also did like Spider-Man. He's done a ton of stuff, and he helped start Image Comics. But the way, if you study like his work and how he breaks down his panels and how he can tell the story, and then understanding like pacing, like the timing and the storytelling in that way. I think he's one of my favorite artists. And then Frank Miller is one of my favorite artists too. Frank Miller did Sin City and 300 and Dark Knight Returns. And if you like, and one thing I really love about Frank Miller is like, he has a really like simple, he uses like 2 or 3 colors in his style, and he's still able to like tell like these really cool stories through like storytelling. I wish I had more time to elaborate on it, because this is a whole thing. And I'll actually be teaching a sequential art workshop at the McCall Center in August. That'll be like a week-long workshop. But yeah, like I guess just understanding like the pacing and just being creative with how you draw your panels and things like that is probably like the best way.
Also, to jump on that as well, I was trying to find a link that wasn't advertising some sort of other business, but there's a and Marcus, I credit you for putting me on to this, but there's a issue it's a G.I. Joe comic book, and it's called Silent Interlude. And I'm actually trying to copy the link right now. Here we go. And I'll paste it in the Zoom chat. But the really interesting thing about this comic book, that there's no words in the entire comic. It's about, how would you say, about 25 pages, 30 pages maybe? And there's absolutely no dialogue through the whole comic. Yet, going from panel to panel to panel, you know exactly what's going on just through the timing and the pacing and the expressions on the characters. So that it's a really dope reference if you want to like, if you want to like read it, well, I don't say read because there's no text, but if you want to read a comic book and see how, if you want to see kind of like that done in probably one of the best ways that you'll ever see it, that's one of the reference too.
Yeah, I was gonna say, think about that example. Like think about, and I have to, as a graphic designer, as as a designer as well, think about visually telling your story without words. Think about how that looks. So if you're doing like a sequential comic, if you're doing a cartoon, if you're doing a logo, if you're doing a magazine cover, think about how that stuff looks without words, and think about, you kind of have to put yourself in other people's minds to how they're going to view that piece, and think about how your work communicates with other people. Because it's a platform, like this creativity is still like our platform, it's still our voice. So like sometimes you might not be around to explain your art piece, you might not be around to explain the logo. So that stuff needs to be able to tell its own narrative, and that narrative should have a piece of you in it as well. So that was a perfect example. There's also a Ninja Turtle book that did the same thing. There was like no words, and it was just like this whole adventure of like I think it was Donatello or one of those guys. But yeah.
There's a question. What would you say were the earliest comic forms?
I guess cave paintings. Cave paintings told the story.
Yeah, a lot of hieroglyphics, especially Egyptian
hieroglyphics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny, right, to see that like you make that reference, and that's not necessarily what you think, but when you look at it, and yeah, like a lot of hieroglyphics would tell a story and tell a narrative, which is essentially what you're trying to do in art, whether you're just doing like, you know, Intergalactic, like our approach to Intergalactic Soul, the illustration portion is basically like taking splash pages from comics, and each piece, like, you know, and having each piece tell an overall narrative. Whereas like, you know, like our comics and our Sunday comics or something like your Sunday comics, for example, whether it be Foxtrot, Curtis, or whoever, you know, some of them are 3 panels where they pretty much like tell a whole story just within a short span of 3 panels. Or, you know, and some of them like, I forgot, not Vanguard, like Haggard the Horrible usually gets about like 9 panels and stuff. I can tell I read a lot of Sunday comics, but yeah, it's like, so it's basically like, you know, having that ability to tell a narrative, to tell a story, you know, large or small within like a confined space. And so each image that you draw, it's like really taking in mind, does this say what it is that I wanted to say before you even add in the text to it? Can the reader follow this along and get through this story and have a general idea of what it is that's going on without me necessarily have to like hold their hand and narrate them through it?
So yeah, I think that's a huge part. Is like it's pretty much like, how do you tell your story without words? How do you tell that like visually? You know, just communicating with people. One thing I also wanted to mention to people is like, it's okay, like we all have different styles. So if your work doesn't look exactly like mine, like there's so many, you know, art, there's so many styles to art, there's so many styles to illustration. I guess the more you grow into your style, the more you kind of put pieces of yourself into it. So like everything that I've drawn here today is just kind of like pieces of me. Like I really like the scraggly lines. I really like the rough gestural drawings and things like that. So like everybody like will, you know, you'll have like your own style. There are some people that have an anime style. You know, like we were talking about Mark Greenfield earlier, he does a lot of like styles kind of catered around like the minstrel show work. Some more, you know, it's Juneteenth.
Brian Malley, I think Brian Malley, the artist for Scott Pilgrim, like even if you look at that, like it's a very, like, you know, comparison to what was drawn today, like what we drawn was more of like more kind of like a realistic, I don't want to use the word traditional, but more realistic forms. Whereas like, you know, you look at stuff like you look at a Scott Pilgrim, you know, you look at like, I don't know if any you watch any recent cartoons, but you look at cartoons like Steven Universe or like Samurai Jack, like you'll see that the styles like vary even when it comes to the anatomy. The one thing is like learning the anatomy is important, because then when you break the rules and you want to like exaggerate, you know, like in anime, usually in anime, people have very, very long legs and smaller torsos, which is like, you know, not according to how the general human figure balances out. But you know, that's one of the aesthetics of anime. So, you know, once you kind of learn the basics of the anatomy, then you can kind of break the rules. And, you know,
Yeah.
with Scott Pilgrim, people are more stumpy looking, you know, so.
Yeah, and even like you know, it being Juneteenth, um, mentioning like some African American artists like Cal Baker. He did a book called it's called The Truth, and it was actually about the Tuskegee experiments, and how it relates to like the Captain America stuff. And like he even has like a really cool cartoony style. He was one of those artists that, you know, that kind of didn't look like traditional comics, but he's like this really awesome cartoonist. You know, the homie Sanford Green, he's down in Columbia. He's doing
Mark
this.
Stillfreeze.
Yeah, Brian Stillfreeze.
Brian
Yeah,
Stillfreeze.
he's in Atlanta. I think he does Black Panther. Sanford Green is doing a book called The Roots, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, like more of my work now is kind of in the design area. Like I'm not too far into the comic field anymore. But yeah, like just shouting out like a bunch of the African American
There's
cartoonists.
also, if and I don't know how many people are into like, you know, mystery slash horror, I guess, but there's a comic book that was just approved to become a television show. I think it's going to be through HBO, but it's written by an African American author, and the artist is this real cool dude. His name is Jason Sean Alexander, but the comic book is called Philadelphia. And it's like basically, I don't know, if you took like True Detective and you blended it with like, I don't know, like Bram Stoker's Dracula or something like that. Like it's just kind of like this crossover between like this detective and kind of like horror. Now granted, it's graphic. I'm gonna tell you ahead of time, it's graphic, but it is a very good comic book, well written, and it's actually turned into a show.
Yeah. I think I'm gonna come in here and just like kind of add some. I'm gonna add my speed lines to this character, little anime feel to it. Normally, what I would do at this point, I probably would go back in this and then go over all of this stuff and start cleaning it up and kind of start to like redefine things. I don't even know. I'm just giving them like this black circle mask. But yeah, I think the main thing about this is like understanding who we are, how we express ourselves, and like having fun with it. Like this is how I've been doing this since I was a kid, and just kind of creating these little comic universes and things like that. And now we do it on a level of like social justice and activism. So you know, even if you wanted to give them like the character like some cool wings. I was watching this.
Translator Z.
Yeah, I was watching some Disney. What was it? Big Hero 6.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You know, if you want to, you know, I'm gonna give them a little belly. Because all body types and shapes are accepted. You know, you can put some little feet back here. But yeah, that's pretty much just the basics, I would say. This looks kind of cool. I might have to do something with this. I can show y'all another piece before I stop my screen share.
There's a question real quick. There was two questions. For one, are there any Black women comic artists we should be watching?
Yeah.
Ashley Woods. There was two Ashley Woods. There's an Ashley Woods is a guy from Australia, but there's also a Black woman by the name of Ashley Woods, I think she's based out of like Chicago. Yeah.
And then there's I think Afua Richardson.
Yeah.
Man, I'm on this. I know I'm forgetting somebody. I know I'm forgetting somebody.
Ashley Woods is like, yeah, like really, really, really good. Actually, I got a couple comics that were done by her, and the crazy thing is, like, when I saw it, I thought it was, at first I thought it was the Ashley Woods from Australia, and I was like, man, this looks nothing like his style. And lo and behold, yeah. So yeah, like I said, you can. There's Ashley Woods from Australia, and then there's Ashley. Oh, yeah, there they go. Posted the link. Yeah, so that's her. And then of course, like, you know, as far as like novelists, you know, Olivia Butler and
Octavia Butler, yeah.
Octavia Butler, yeah.
Who's pretty much, you know, that's pretty much the goddess of Afrofuturism.
And there's also like I know, like, and this is off the realm of comic books, but even, I guess to say, drawing inspiration, there's a book that I read called Black Quantum Futurism, and that's written by, hold on a second, I got the book right here. It is written by, it's called Black Quantum Futurism Theory and Practice, and gosh, where's the author? I can't remember her name. I'm looking for her name. Someone probably might post it. Okay, no.
She's from Philly. We actually did an art event with her called Tom Camp.
Rashida Phillips.
Yeah.
Rashida Phillips. So yeah, so even that, like, I read that book. Well, it's actually a series, but like, even stuff along the lines that reading those books, there's a lot of concepts that like ideas and things that I'll pull from, and they'll give me ideas to incorporate things, as far as incorporating things in Intergalactic Soul, or like, you know, like comics. I mean, because there's so many things that happen, right? That like these stories that exist that we don't know about, and then we read across them. The first thing we think is like, yo, why don't more people know about this, right? So then, you know, one way to always get a message across is making it into a comic book. You know, comic books have always been on the forefront of like addressing, you know, social issues. They always been like very progressive about, you know, highlighting issues in society. As most of you probably know, you know, X-Men is based off the civil rights movement. You got Professor X is supposed to be like Martin Luther King. Magneto is more like Malcolm X, and Captain America was based off the Tuskegee experiments. You know, like, they long ago they had like an issue where like where Colossus announced that he was gay. Then they had like a gay marriage in common. This was like all before, like, you know, there was this universal acceptance, I guess, that it's not universally accepted, but they've always, again, they've never feared about putting themselves out there and creating narratives around these realistic issues. And without even realize, most people are learning and being entertained all at the same time.
Yeah. So yeah, I wanted to share, like, this is pretty much the same pose, like, but this is a little cleaned up, a little more refined, and then like we added like colors to it. But it's pretty much the same kind of direction where I started off like this. But yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like, how much time do we have, Jason? You know how much time?
I'm sorry. We might. Well, it's 13 minutes past 12. Are we holding anybody up? Do we need to? Because I can, like, look, I can nerd out for a while. So.
Yes, that's you know, I think the one thing that they, like, you know, like, that we always say is like, yeah, like, you know, your creative talents are like your gift. You know, like that, you know, like, don't front on your gifts. And like, and I guess understanding like, how do we use this to express, you know, as expression, as like healthy ways to express ourselves. And also like, and understanding that you can also use this stuff as your platform, like whether it's comics, whether you're making an animation, whether it's a painting in a museum, whether it's sneaker design, whatever you take into like use your creativity and try to figure out a way on like how you can make that serve and like help people and things like that. Like it's, you know, use it as your platform. It's going to be your voice, and be careful about how you use that voice and like what are you using it for. So
to double back, there was a question asked earlier. Can you talk a little more about inclusive design with the star design? When you did the star?
Oh, yeah, I could talk a lot about inclusive design. So like, you know, my day job is I work for this wonderful company called Mind Design, and we develop uh, spinal wares for patients with spinal issues. And I have to take, and that helps a lot of, and I'm not a biomedical engineer. I work with a really awesome biomedical engineer. I just like to make the stuff look cool. That's my job. But taking that concept from comics and like thinking about people like what does Iron Man, how does his armor look, and things like that. But like when we talk about inclusive design, we're kind of going into these ideas of like functional design for everyone. How does this work for like everyone? And a lot of times when we talk about inclusiveness, there's so many conversations around inclusiveness, but we always tend to leave people out. And the people that get left out are all, you know, like we still love to like discriminate, you know, based off of whether it's gender, whether it's like your sexuality, whether it's like your color, the color of your skin. Somebody is always getting left out. And these ideas of inclusiveness, or, you know, equitable, we should say equitable design, it's like, how do we make this design, how do we make this stuff function for everyone? Like, I still feel like you could talk about certain issues, but I feel like everyone needs to understand what those issues are about and why these issues are important. So even if we're doing something like, you know, people downplay a comic, it's just a comic book, it's just muscle man, it's just whatever, space people. But how do you tie these ideas into like creating better worlds for like everyone, not just a couple people, not just people who have both legs, you know, like not just people who are like whatever, but like how do we create these ideas for everyone? And like Jason, last night when we were having dinner, like you were even mentioning the soap dispensers, right?
Oh, soap dispenser, yeah. Yeah.
The programming behind soap dispensers on how the automatic soap dispensers wouldn't read certain skin types when you put your hand underneath it. But you know, you have to understand that like this world consists of like all types of people, and I feel like a lot of people tend to get left out, and like, you know, like we're all important in our own way. So like I guess when I was like making that star, that was just a symbol, you know, like I use space as a symbol for like kind of like this unknown idea of like heaven and peace and things like that. So like earlier when I just drew the star on his face, I was just like this kind of like encompassing symbol that I just kind of created to kind of represent like this, you know, like, and I like, you know, whenever we're talking about equitable design, like make sure that like when you're including everybody, like you can't leave people out. So, you know, like, and by that, I remember we're being in a meeting and we're talking about housing for post-incarcerated inmates, and like what does that look like, and how do we talk about that? And you know, like there was someone who didn't want to like didn't want to associate post-incarcerated inmates with like the company or the brand or whatnot. But you know, I had to explain like, hey, but this is a part of equitable design. You can't leave people out because of like their history or things like that. You have to give people a chance. Like people should get like another chance, and people have to grow. People have to
Rehabilitation.
Yeah, and you have to do that. And like you know, like they exist in society too. They've done their time. Like, so why like, and it can't be like, well, forget those guys, blah blah blah. But that's also a part of inclusive design on like how do we help everyone out? How do we rehabilitate where like everyone kind of has like these fair opportunities? Because a lot of the problems that exist in the world are because everyone didn't get a fair opportunity, or everyone didn't get the fair shake that they deserve. So like,
Yeah.
I guess like when I was like trying to make this hero earlier, like I kind of wanted the person to kind of represent everything. He needed to represent Black people. He needed to represent transgenders. He needs to represent all of these things that like make us individuals and like that make us like these kind of like beautiful people in the world. And like even when the world is not ready to accept all of this stuff, it needs to be ready to accept. And that's like, our work is around Afrofuturism. We talk about Black spaces, Black people, and what that looks like in the future. So like that's part of I feel like that could be centered around like equitable design, because how do we exist in like these futuristic worlds? So yeah, I just started harping right there.
Now, like, so even from, I guess it's like a developer standpoint, when we were discussing yesterday, we think about like these technologies. So even in this moment right now where, we have like the Black Lives Matter movement, and there's a lot of, attention and support centered around the equal treatment of Black and brown people, and, the hashtag, the end racism is even like right now. I remember my dad telling me like, it's going to get better when like my generation dies out. But I'm like, well, technology is being created right now. We're becoming more and more dependent on, and those same biasness and whatnot can be introduced in our technology. Like, when Apple released the Apple Card, there was a low approval rating for women and people of color, and this is just an algorithm that's being ran that's doing this. So, that's when we talk about inclusive design, that's why it's so important, especially now, where like technology is just rapidly coming out, and we're becoming more and more, I guess you say more and more dependent. It's streamlining a lot of things, which is kind of like the point of technology, right? Is to make things kind of like easier and make things, repeatable processes more automated. But, when we get into things along the lines of like, facial recognition, which I just posted a video of John Oliver did a video about facial recognitions, and this, oh yeah, I saw that book. I know exactly what you're talking about. And I can't remember it either. Someone just had sent it to me on Instagram, but when we talk about these technologies, I want to say it was even Amazon and Google, I believe, who were using like this algorithm for their, for their job applicants. And, it discriminated against women and, people of color, Black and brown people. Even like the job I work at now, they use this kind of like PI personality testing, and it determines whether you're like a culture fit, which when people say like that word culture fit, it scares the crap out of me, because I'm like, all right, well, if the pre-existing culture, isn't something that I'm necessarily a part of, doesn't make me an ineffective employee or an ineffective communicator. It just means like, I don't care to go get brewskis or play golf or something. Then to get denied that, like how many people are going to be excluded? Even like, if you think about, there's a lot of developers that come from overseas, especially India. Like they're probably not going to necessarily be a culture fit to like, a white male American lifestyle. So they're going to get denied a job based on some sort of algorithm. You know what I mean? So when we think of inclusive design, it goes back to what Marcus was saying, and I know I'm repeating it, but just kind of like creating this design with a perspective outside of yourself, like imagining, people outside of yourself using this or reading this or, eating this or whatever it may be. You try to do your best to include as many people as you can, from, whether disabled, whether, transgender, LGBTQ, like, Black, white, brown, yellow, polka dot, don't matter. Like whatever you can do to incorporate your design so that, everybody has like this opportunity to benefit from it. Then, that's kind of like yeah, that's pretty much inclusive design in a nutshell. There you go. Algorithms of Oppression. That's it. And I'm glad you posted it because I would have butchered that name. Like I'm
And also, and that's to mention like when Jason said, understanding things that are outside of yourself. The one thing that kind of scares me about the ideas of equitable design is like when we're talking about these things, we can't ignore the cries or the I should say the cries of people that need the help. And I bring that with the example of Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter. Because there's somebody that's, I'm pretty sure I'm going to read some type of article at some point that's going to try to include the idea of all lives matter as some kind of equitable design concept, but not understanding the whole reason or purpose or history behind the idea of why there needs to be a Black Lives Matter in the first place. So I already know that I'm gonna see that art in some point, and it's gonna like
it's
really
already
piss
out,
me
man.
off, and I'm gonna stay up, like, and I'm gonna lose sleep over it. So that's, I always try to mention that thing about when we're talking about the equitable design stuff and the inclusive design, make sure that you're not leaving people out, and make sure that you're hearing the cries of the people that need the help, or the people, the oppressed people or whatnot, how, you know, however we want to word that, but don't ignore like the people that need the help. And like Jason said, understand how this stuff works outside of like yourself.
Yeah. Because even when we talk about like, and I think that's the fine line of what you're seeing a lot now. Like Marcus was saying, when I was a kid, you know, all my heroes were white men, because like, you know, Captain America, like Spider-Man. I'm sipping coffee. I've been sipping coffee out of my Spider-Man mug. But like, you know, like Spider-Man was, you know, white. Like all the dope characters were white. Like, you know, all fairness, no one wanted to be the Falcon. Like I never looked at the Falcon and was like, you know what? That outfit and everything, that's my future right there. Like nobody, and it just, and again, it was like, yo, all the cool characters were white guys. So early on, and you know, I've learned to to see myself in people that don't look like me. And I think that's the challenge that we come to when we talk about inclusive design, right? To be a designer, to be a creator, to be a, you know, to try to like spearhead change in any way, shape, or fashion. The first thing is having the ability to see yourself in somebody or something that doesn't look like you, or maybe not speak like you, or, you know, doesn't have the same background. And I think that's where the heart of like inclusion lies. Because again, like even with the display at the Ackland, the LHAXX text, you know, like, I mean, outside of myself, my son can kind of read it. Like he can look at it and be like, okay, I know sort of what you were saying here. And he may not even be able to do that. It's been so long since I've actually like worked in front of him. But you know, when we did a talk, there's a brother from, I can't remember, actually I already forgot. I believe he was from UNC Wilmington. And he had asked the question, would I create a book to, you know, and kind of like translate it directly? And, you know, I explained, like, you know, that's not the point, but I guess the challenge to the viewer has always been, can you relate and empathize for something that you cannot understand nor own? And that's one of the challenges as us as a human being, right? Is again, like, okay, I don't get this. Like I would never know what it's like to be a woman. You know, like everything that it takes, all the challenges that's faced with, you know, being in the workforce as a woman. Like I've been in meetings where we were making an app for soccer moms, and literally the only woman in the room did not get her opinion just got like looked over. You know, I've been in places like that, and granted, despite me not being a woman, I can be in a position like that and say like, okay, like this is screwed up, and I see what's happening here, and that's just me just having an open perspective of like, not just looking for people to treat me well, but to treat everybody well and treat everybody with the same level of respect. And yeah, so, you know, again, you know, having that inclusive design, I think it just boils down again to just like rather than looking for like your likeness in somebody else, is just simply being able to look at somebody else, and whether you understand them or not, just being able to empathize for them as a human being and want them to have the same opportunities, you know, and luxuries as yourself, you know, in all fairness. But
yeah.
so that's the Sunday sermon.
Okay, I'm gonna stop the share. I'm gonna stop sharing now.
But
So how's everyone doing? How's everyone doing so far?
So there's also I meant to mention when we were talking about authors, I told you I'm bad with names. Last name Coates. I'm gonna mess the name. The first name, somebody.
Coates.
There you go. Very good, like excellent writer. If you want to get into like, you know, black authors, that's a very good reference right there. Any one of the books for the most part, but excellent writer. I meant to mention that earlier because he also wrote the Water Dancer. So yeah, I bought the Water Dancer. I haven't cracked it open yet because I'm going through the memoirs of Dapper Dan. For those who don't know who Dapper Dan is, an amazing story, amazing fashion designer. Pretty much is like the person that made like Gucci relevant in the Black community, I guess to say. But yeah, I'm gonna read the Water. I gotta read the Water. But he also wrote the Black Panther comic. So now it's not based off like the movie. It's different. But when there was like the resurgence and they issued the Black Panther comic, it was illustrated by Brian Stillfreeze, who's a Black artist, and it was written by Mr. Coates. So.
Well, Marcus, Jason, thank you so much for this workshop and
No problem.
everything that we've seen. And thank you to our attendees who asked fabulous questions, dropped wonderful references for all of us to go and explore. This workshop has been recorded, so we are going to caption it behind the scenes, and then we'll be able to post it on our website and YouTube channel so that we can share it with others who weren't able to join us. And you can go back and watch Marcus and Jason's amazingness anytime you want.
Yeah, and if there's any more questions or anything in general, you know, feel free to like shoot us an email or reach out to us on Instagram or however way. And selfless plug. So if anybody caught the Intergalactic Soul performance last night, there was a song that Q performed called Only Human. It's a beautiful ballad, but that song is actually streamable on all platforms right now. So if you care to hear it, like the not live band, well, yeah, actually it was. He recorded with a live band too. So yeah, if you care to hear that song again, by all means, it's on all the streaming platforms to check out.
Yeah, you know, my final words. First of all, happy Father's Day to everyone out there. Thanks for signing up for the workshop. And, you know, I felt like this was really just a trick just to kind of like help people to learn to express themselves. It really had nothing to do with comics. Just wanted to show some love and like talk about, you know, like healthy expression and like how we have to do to like create like better futures. So like, you know, I appreciate everyone and shout out to the Ackland for like supporting us in this project.
We have enjoyed working with you guys so much, and thank you so much for taking your time on your Sunday morning. And with that, we are gonna get ready, at least public programs, my department, and Allison, who you saw earlier, we're gonna get ready for our virtual Family and Friends Sunday, which is kicking off at 2 o'clock, so an hour and a half. We're gonna have a live story time at 2:30, and there will be more interviews with many of our artists involved in this Intergalactic Soulstice weekend, including a great video with Quentin Talley, Marcus Kiser, and Jason Woodberry. That is linked on our calendar event for Virtual and Family and Friends Sunday. So if you guys have more time this afternoon, feel free to come check out Virtual Family Day with the Ackland. Thank you again. This is a wonderful way to kick off Sunday morning.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day, guys.